How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the homestead. In this episode of the Modern Mountain Man Project, I'm going to be giving you my thoughts on knives. Now, just as I said there, these are just my thoughts. These are my opinions. I'm not saying that these are the definitive rules for knife carry. I'm not saying that this is gospel. What may work for me may not work for you, and what may work for you may not work for me. That's just how this video is going to go. Now, about 1.5 to 2 years ago, I transitioned away from carrying folding knives, which I'd carried pretty much every day from about 15, 16 on up to, like I say, 1.5 to 2 years ago. And I transitioned over to completely carrying fixed blades. Now, of course, I had carried fixed blades before that, but not really with any regularity. I kind of looked at them as, I won't say a novelty, but something that you only use when you were going out on a hike or going backpacking or something like that. Once I really tried it out, it's worked for me. Now, the first one that I carried, like I say, with any regularity was this Buck 102. And I really like Buck. Their USA-made knives are made local about 1.5 hours south of me, which I think is pretty dang cool. And for the money, they make a great product. I'm not saying that they're the absolute top tier best knife maker in the world, but if you're looking for a $50, $60, $70 knife that's made in the USA, I think it's kind of hard to beat Buck. Now, the 102 may be a smaller knife, but if you're carrying a fixed blade knife every day, you don't necessarily want a giant Rambo knife on your hip. Not only does that look a little bit weird, and yes, I'm saying that as someone who open carries a big ass gun every single day, but it's also just cumbersome. It's not comfortable to carry a knife that big. So why not carry one that's just as capable, but smaller? I would say that I have average to maybe slightly larger than average sized hands, and the 102 fits my hand perfectly fine. Now, if I was wearing gloves, that would be a little different story. Because of this rear guard back here, if I had a gloved hand on, this would feel pretty cramped, if not only give me a 3-finger grip. That's why I've transitioned to this knife only being a summer carry knife, but nevertheless, it's still a great knife. I'm able to choke up on it and get a pretty good skinning grip. It's, I would say, about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch too long, because I would prefer to have a skinning knife be right at the end of my index finger. That's just so I know that that tip isn't cutting somewhere that I don't want it to cut. I could have it protected underneath my index finger, and anywhere my index finger goes, I know that that's where my blade's gonna go. That's just, like with all this, personal preference. But it's still not too big. It's not an oversized knife. I've used this to clean a bunch of fish, a couple chickens, and it does the job very well. Now, that said, the reason I transitioned away from this over to, I'll leave that unsnapped, the Buck 113 is because the 113 is a full tang. And I could hear you guys in the comments already, well, the 102 is also a full tang. No, it's not. It's a rat tail tang. A rat tail tang may run the tang through the handle, but it narrows down. It is not the full thickness of the blade all the way through. Whereas with the 113, you could see that that is just a big chunk of metal running all the way through that handle. That means it's just that much more solid. Am I really saying that I wouldn't trust the 102 if I needed to do something like process firewood or build a shelter? Not necessarily. But if I have the ability to carry something better, why not carry something better? And that's why I transitioned over to the 113. That said, the 113 does have some issues as compared to the 102. One of them being the sheath. With the 113, I'm only able to get, I would say, a 3-finger grip at best, 2-finger grip most of the time to get that knife out. You can see that I also modified this sheath so that I could start carrying it at about my 11 o'clock and do like a cross draw. And I like that because with my coat here, I only button the center 3 buttons and then I leave the bottom 2 undone unless it's just really windy, really cold. So that allows me to just reach over and grab my knife as opposed to having to either unbutton or reach up my coat and kind of grab it from over here. It's just so that I could keep that heat retained and, like I say, not have to either unbutton or lift up and let all that warm air out. With the 102, even though it has that thumb snap, I'm able to get that full grip break the snap, and the knife's right there perfectly in my grip. So that's an advantage there. The other advantage with the 102 as compared to the 113 is, ironically enough, in processing firewood or building shelters. Anything where you're having to use as much of the knife blade as possible, you don't want it to swoop up. You don't want that curve. With the 102, you have a much longer flat section before it starts to swoop up towards the tip. With the 113, you only have, I would say, 1.5 to 2 inches of flat space before it starts to swoop up towards the tip. Can you still use it to process firewood? Absolutely. Is it going to be as easy as compared to the 102? Not really. Flip side is, with the 102, you have this swoop section here that goes up towards the tip. Now, if I remember correctly, the reason Buck puts that into this style knife is so that you could get as fine of a tip as possible. I don't really know how much of that is just marketing BS or not, but the back of this knife was actually kind of sharp when I got it new. And I would use it, and still do use it when I'm carrying it, to open up packages. It is plenty sharp to cut the tape, open up any cardboard that I need to, and then I don't need to wreck the blade when I'm opening up the packages. Does it really matter all that much? Is tape gonna ruin this blade? Not really. But if I could save it out that little bit, why not? But getting back to that swoop, the reason it's not advantageous for processing firewood is because if you're batoning back here on this back section, and then you catch this swoop right here, whatever you're using to baton is gonna get caught, kind of dig into that swoop, and get stuck. It's not impossible to do. I have used this knife to baton firewood, so it's not like it's that hard of a task. And I wouldn't carry it during the summer if I truly was worried about its capabilities. Because even though I'm not as concerned about making shelter, as concerned about making fire as I am during the winter time, it still is a concern. It is still something that I have in the back of my mind. So having a knife that's capable is definitely important. And while I won't say this knife is not capable, it's arguably less so capable than the 113. Now again, the 113 has problems as compared to the 102, but hopefully you can kind of see what I'm getting at there. Now after the 102 and the 113, I said, these are good knives. They're not bad knives, but they're not the best. They aren't exactly to the specs that I would want out of my ideal knife. And while I'm sure that knife exists and I did a whole bunch of searching to try and find it, I was unfortunately not successful. So I made my own knife. This started life as a Western W36 knife blank. For those of you who don't know, Western was a knife maker out of Boulder, Colorado, up until, I want to say, the early to mid 80s, at which point they closed down. Fast forward to about a year ago, and I found a knife blank on eBay. Pretty cool. Now the W36 originally had about an inch longer blade and a dramatic swoop up to the tip, similar to the 102. The reason I did away with that swoop and shortened the blade goes back to the profile I'm looking for. I want the blade to have as flat of a section as possible for as long as possible before it swoops up into just a nice, what I would call a belly curve, similar to the 113. Has that nice dramatic swoop, very good for skinning. And again, I want that flat section there so that I can process firewood as easily as possible. It's not like I'm going to be processing giant logs or anything, but at least being able to process those sticks without having them kink out one way or another because of the swoop of this blade or this blade, that's a plus. And I would say that we got roughly 2.5, 3 inches worth of flat space, usable flat space before that swoop. So that's pretty sweet. And then the spine of the knife is perfectly flat and a 90-degree spine. The flat part, it goes back to, like I'm saying, using a baton. If I strike out here with that baton, unlike the 102 where you're going to get that baton stuck in the knife, this one having a perfectly flat back, it's not going to get stuck. You're going to be able to just keep on beating pretty easily. The 90-degree part goes to using a ferro rod. If you don't have a sharp spine on the back, you're not going to be able to throw sparks off that ferro rod easily. You could still do it, but having that 90-degree spine allows you to do it much easier. And then the length of it. While it is a little bit longer than what I would again like the tip of the knife to be right underneath the tip of my index finger. It's not that bad. Again, it's not like I'm not going to be able to control that ½ inch sticking past my index finger. I just have to remember that, okay, it's not right underneath, it's right there, so don't go too far. And then the main grip is, again, a full 4-finger grip. And if I had gloves on, there's no rear guard back here, and it's actually a bit longer than what I need for a 4-finger grip. So if I had gloves, it would still fit pretty dang well in the hand. And then this hole back here, I have yet to use it, but the reason it's there isn't so that I can have a lanyard. It's so that you could take some tree flagging tape, you know, that bright pink or bright orange stuff, and tie a ribbon through the back there, so that if you're working in some really deep powdery snow and you drop your knife, you at least have that long ribbon to hopefully find it and not find this end first. And even though this knife may look the part, this is not a full tang knife. Western knives were a split tang design, meaning instead of having a rat tail where it really thins out at the center, you basically cut that center section out. So you have a top tang and a bottom tang. That lightens the rear of the knife while still giving you twice the strength of a standard rat tail. So pretty neat design, and the balance of this knife is still a little bit heavy towards the handle, but it's not that bad. It fits very well in the hand. It feels great. The only negative that I do have with this knife, even though I was the one who made it, is the thickness of the handle. I like the thickness. It does fit very well in my hand, at least, again, for me. I was shaping it and filing it down to a point that I thought fit very well. Problem is, because of how wide and thick that handle is, it was not easy to have a sheath made for it. So this one was made by Wyoming Axe and Saw. It's a very nice sheath. The problem is the retention is not that great. Is it terrible? No. It obviously took me a couple times before that knife fell out of there, but ideally you don't want your knife to be falling out of your sheath under any circumstances. And it goes back to the handle. Because it is so big, so thick, he wasn't able to shape the sheath in a way that allows a positive retention. There's no real easy way to get that positive lock in there, even though there is kind of that swoop down there for your index finger, which is where you would typically crease in the sheath and kind of use that as the retention point. Because again, I mean, you could look at the sheath. It goes thin, thin, thin. Holy crap, why is that an inch thick? So he just wasn't able to effectively shape that down to get that positive retention. So I can't really blame him at the end of the day. It goes back to the knife not being perfect, as good as I would want it to be. But as far as fitting in the hand, having that good feel, I would say that this one's a winner. And I mentioned this in my winter everyday carry video. I'm not as concerned with the sheath as I am with the knife itself. Even with the not as good retention, all I have to do every once in a while is bump the knife, make sure that's in the sheath. It's not that hard. The only time where this knife could pop out of the sheath unexpectedly is really just if I'm running or like doing any sort of really exaggerated movement. That might be enough to let this thing fly out of there. But again, if I just remember to bump the knife every once in a while, the likelihood of it flying out of the sheath ain't that high. So while it may not be as positively retained as I would like, while it's not, you know, being held in there with any positive retention, it's good enough. That's about all I got for this video, you guys. I could ramble on and on about knives like a lot of other topics, so I gotta cut this video somewhere. But just to give you a quick recap, if I'm looking for my ideal knife, I want a knife that has I would say at least 2.5 to 3 inches of flat space on the blade before just a really easy, nice swoop up to the tip. I want a spine that's perfectly flat on the back and 90 degrees so that I can baton easily and spark a ferro rod easily. I want the overall blade length to be so that I can basically extend my index finger and use it for skinning without it being too much longer than my index finger itself. That way I can know exactly where that tip is and know it's not cutting anywhere it shouldn't be cutting. And then I want the grip to be a full 4-finger grip, especially when gloved, because if you have a glove, you don't have as much dexterity or as much grip. So the extra 4 fingers extra is very important as compared to having a 2 or 3-finger grip. And then having it fit well in the hand. That's also important to me as well. So with that, you guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. It was just me rambling for a while. If you did, please leave it a like, comment if you have any questions, share the video with someone you think also might enjoy it, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. I really appreciate all the support and all the views I've been getting recently, you guys. But please make sure that you subscribe so that you can keep seeing these Modern Mountain Man videos every Monday. With that, you guys, thank you for watching. Think for yourself, shoot straight, and I will see you next time.